The title officer said my name twice before I understood she was talking to me. "Mr. Hale, before we go any further, I have to ask you something, and I need you to answer carefully. Are you aware that you're the recorded owner of 411 Alder Street?" I actually looked over my shoulder, like maybe another Marcus Hale had walked into the room behind me. I wasn't there for me at all. My deckhand Tom Okafor was buying his first house, a little two-bedroom up the hill from the marina, and the lender wanted a cosigner with steady income and clean credit. 22 years of pushing barges through the same harbor gets you both, if not much else. Signing my name on somebody else's paperwork was the whole plan for that afternoon. 30 minutes, a handshake, back to the boat. Instead, the officer, a precise woman named Priya with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, turned her monitor around so I could see the screen. A routine background pull on a cosigner had spit out something her software flagged as unusual: my name attached to a commercial parcel downtown. Not a lien. Not a debt. Ownership. Held through something called a land trust, recorded 26 years ago. "That's a mistake," I told her. "I don't own anything downtown. I rent a slip in a one-bedroom, and I'm not sure the one-bedroom likes me." She didn't smile. She scrolled. "The trust names you as sole beneficiary, Mr. Hale. It was recorded the same spring as," she squinted, "the settlement of the estate of Ruth Hale. Relative of yours." The room got very quiet, the way water goes flat right before weather comes in. Ruth Hale was my grandmother. She raised me from age 7, after my mother left, in a 2-story brick building on Alder Street with a bakery on the ground floor and flour in the air so constant I thought all houses smelled like that. She died when I was 19. And the one thing everybody in my family agreed on, the one fact repeated at every holiday for 26 years, was that Ruth died broke. The bank took the building. The debts took the rest. There was nothing, Marcus. She was a sweet woman, but she was drowning, and nobody knew. My Uncle Ray told me that. He told me that standing in the parking lot after her funeral. With his hand heavy on my shoulder, I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning and paid $11 for copies. It took the clerk 4 minutes to print what somebody had spent 26 years making sure I never saw. The deed was real. The land trust was real. My grandmother had bought that building outright, quietly, years before she died, and placed it in trust with one beneficiary. Me. Not her son. Not the family. Me, at 19, a kid gutting fish and sleeping on a friend's couch because I believed there was nothing to come home to. Then the clerk slid one more page across the counter, and that was the one that took the floor out. It was an affidavit, dated 8 months after Ruth's death. A sworn statement declaring that Marcus Hale, beneficiary, had voluntarily disclaimed all interest in the property and consented to its management transferring to a family representative. And at the bottom, above my typed name, was a signature, my signature. Except it wasn't. I know my own hand. I've signed manifests and fuel logs and Coast Guard paperwork nearly every working day of my adult life. Whoever wrote this got the shape close, the way you'd get it close copying off an old library card. The M leaned wrong. The final E trailed up instead of flat. It was me the way a wax figure is a person. At 19, while I was mourning her, somebody sat down, practiced my name, and signed my inheritance away for me. That night I parked across the street from 411 Alder and just sat there in the dark. The bakery windows on the ground floor were papered over, but the upper stories were lit. Offices. A dental lab. Apartments on 3. People living and working inside a building that had legally been mine since before some of them were born, mailing rent checks every month to somebody. I didn't call anyone. I didn't confront anyone. I've towed enough dead ships to know you don't yank a line before you know what's on the other end of it. Instead, I read the affidavit one more time under the dome light, all the way down to the notary block. 2 witnesses had signed, swearing they watched me disclaim everything my grandmother built. The second witness name was one I knew. The first witness was no surprise at all. Ray Delgado. My uncle. The man who patted my shoulder at the funeral and told me the bank had taken everything. The second name I read 3 times, then folded the paper away and made myself stop looking at it, because I wasn't ready to believe what believing it would mean. Some threads you don't pull until you know what they're attached to. Instead, I drove home and sat up half the night with a pot of coffee, walking backward through my own life. Ruth Hale wasn't technically my grandmother by blood, not that it ever mattered a single day. She was my father's stepmother, and when my father died young and my mother, Diane, came apart and drifted out of state, Ruth was the one who showed up with a station wagon and took me home. I was 7. She never once made it feel like charity. She made it feel like I'd finally been delivered to the right address. She ran the bakery on the ground floor of the Alder building and we lived above it, and my whole childhood smelled like yeast and cinnamon and the hot metallic breath of the deck ovens. She had me flouring loaves at 5 in the morning before school, standing on a milk crate so I could reach the bench. She used to say the ovens didn't care about your feelings, only your attendance. I thought she was teaching me to bake. She was teaching me who shows up. Ray showed up too, but differently. He came around on the 1st of the month, usually with a scheme. A boat share. A franchise thing. A guy he knew. Ruth would hear him out at the counter, wipe her hands on her apron, and say, "Raymond, I sell bread. Bread doesn't need a partner." I was a kid, so I missed what was underneath it, the way his jaw set when she handed me the register keys instead of him, the way he called me the boarder once when he thought I couldn't hear. She died the fall I turned 19. Fast. Her heart, in her sleep, upstairs above the ovens she'd fired that same morning, and in the fog of those weeks, Ray became the family. He handled the funeral. He handled the paperwork. He handled me. 2 weeks after we buried her, he sat me down in the empty bakery, lights off, chairs up on the tables, and gave me the speech I would carry for 26 years. The building was mortgaged to the rafters. The business owed suppliers. The bank was taking it all, and honestly, Marcus, it's a mercy she didn't live to see it. Then he boxed up her things, her mixing bowls, her aprons, her handwritten papers, and said he'd keep them in storage until things settled. I never saw one box again. I asked twice over the years. Water damage, he said the first time. The second time he just changed the subject to the Seahawks. Here's the part that sat in my chest like a swallowed hook. To my knowledge, Ray had actually been in real trouble that year. That part was never invented. He'd co-signed on a failed restaurant, he was underwater, collectors called the house. Which is exactly why nobody questioned it when, a few years later, Ray was suddenly doing fine. Steady. Comfortable. A new truck every few years, a condo with a water view. The family called it a turnaround story. Ray, the businessman, who finally landed on his feet, and me, the boarder, out on the water at 19 with nothing. I'd been proud of him. Worse than proud. During his rough patches, and there were a few, I mailed him money. 200 here. 500 there. Once, after his hip surgery, $1,000 I'd saved for a down payment on my own boat. I did the math that night at my kitchen table and figured I'd sent Ray Delgado somewhere north of $11,000 over 2 decades, while he was collecting rent on a building my grandmother had put in my name. 26 years of rents from offices, a dental lab, apartments. I ran rough numbers on a legal pad, conservative ones, and kept arriving somewhere close to $2 million, and had to get up and stand on the porch in the cold for a while, every kindness reread differently now. Ray steering conversations away from the old neighborhood. Ray telling me there was nothing left worth seeing when I mentioned driving past Alder Street. Ray's boy Cody, who I knew worked maintenance in some building downtown, and I suddenly understood which one. I wanted to drive to Ray's condo and put the affidavit against his door with my fist. I didn't. 22 years of tug work teaches you one law above all the others: you never move a heavy thing until you've charted what's under the water. Rage is a bad navigator. Records are a good one, so I started looking for anyone who'd known the building before Ray rewrote its history, And one name kept surfacing in the old permits and filings, a property manager named Walter Marsh, who'd handled the Alder building back in Ruth's day. Walter had died in 2019. But Walter had a daughter, Elena, an attorney across the bay. When I finally got her on the phone and said my name, there was a long pause on the line. Then she said, "Hale. Marcus Hale. Come to my office." My father kept boxes about that building, and I always wondered if anyone was ever going to ask about them. Elena Marsh's office smelled like coffee and old paper, and her father's boxes covered a whole conference table. Walter Marsh had managed the Alder building for Ruth for 11 years, and he'd been a meticulous man. Copies of the original trust paperwork, red rolls from the 90s, and a note in his own hand, dated a year after Ruth died, that said only, "RD claims disclaimer. Requested copy. Never received." Something smells off. He'd been pushed out as manager 2 months later. Elena read the affidavit I brought, took off her glasses, and was quiet a moment. "This is forgery, concealment, and 26 years of converted rents," she said. "It's also going to be Ray's word against a dead woman and a signature. If we sue him tomorrow, his lawyer paints you as a bitter relative with a theory. We need his books before he knows anyone's looking. Once he's on notice, records have a way of developing water damage. I already knew where the books lived. What we needed was a way in. The Alder building didn't have a staff. It had Cody, my cousin's kid, Ray's own son, doing maintenance alone, and a rotating list of subcontractors for anything he couldn't handle. One of those subs was a small outfit whose owner had worked harbor jobs with me for years. I asked him for a favor I didn't fully explain: put me on his crew for the Alder Street contract. I went in under Voss, my mother's maiden name, wearing my own work clothes, carrying my own tools. Elena's one commandment rode along with me: touch nothing you're not hired to touch, photograph only what's in plain view, log every date and time. Evidence gathered wrong isn't evidence, she said. It's a gift to the other side. Cody met me in the lobby the first morning with a clipboard and the tired eyes of a man doing 3 jobs for 1 paycheck. 33 years old, and I'd last seen him at a family barbecue when he was in middle school. He didn't recognize me. 26 years, a gray beard, and a fake name will do that. We fixed a roof drain together the first week, rebuilt a corroded boiler feed the second. He was a good worker, careful, honest with tenants, and constantly apologizing for things that weren't his fault. The dental lab on 2 had been billed for a ventilation overhaul that never happened. I watched Cody wave it off with a rehearsed line about scheduling. In the basement office, in plain view on the desk, sat 2 ledgers. One printed and tidy, for the accountant. One older, handwritten, where the real numbers lived. 3 tenants paid cash. The cash appeared in the second book and never in the first. I photographed what lay open, logged the dates, and sent everything to Elena, who built her spreadsheet like a woman assembling a rifle. The one thing Cody never defended was his father. "Dad manages the place for the family," he told me once, hanging a fire door. Some family arrangement from way back. You want my honest opinion? The arrangement is he cashes checks and I patch pipes. He said it like a joke. It didn't land like one. Ray himself came through twice a month, and the first time nearly ended everything. He walked into the basement while I had my head inside an electrical panel, stood 6 feet from me, and asked Cody who the new guy was. "Sub from Harbor Mechanical. Voss." Ray looked at me a beat too long. "You local? You look familiar." I kept my eyes on the wiring and said everybody's got one of those faces. He laughed, told Cody to quit hiring guys who bill in whole hours, and left. I listened to his footsteps fade and realized I'd stopped breathing somewhere around the word familiar. Deceiving Ray cost me nothing. Deceiving Cody cost me sleep. He was the only person in that building being straight with everyone, and I was lying to him every single day, cataloging evidence that was going to detonate his father. Then came the proofing room door. The old bakery space on the ground floor had been dark for years. Used for storage, and the contract said to fix its warped rear door before winter. The frame had shifted, so I opened the wall beside it, and my pry bar hit something that wasn't stud or pipe. Wrapped in cracked oilcloth, wedged into the cavity like someone meant for it to wait, was a thick book with a water-stained green cover, Ruth's recipe ledger. Her handwriting on every page, flour ghosted into the gutter of the spine. Sourdough schedules. Molasses bread. And in the margins, in her small square print, notes that weren't about baking at all. Beside the cinnamon rolls, did these alone today, age 11. Better than mine. Don't tell him. Beside a bread pricing table, a building full of rent is nice. A building full of people is the point. She hadn't just left me the deed. She'd left me her voice, sealed in the wall of the room where she taught me to work. I didn't log that one for Elena. Some evidence is for court. Some is for you. I was still standing there with the ledger in my hands when the dental lab tech from upstairs leaned in looking for Cody, saw the open wall, and made small talk I barely heard, until one sentence cut through like a horn in fog. Guess none of it matters anyway. My boss says the building just sold. Some developer. Supposedly it closes in a month. Elena confirmed it by the end of the week, and the news was worse than a rumor. Ray had signed a purchase agreement with a regional developer. All cash, 30 days to close. No inspection contingencies. No financing delays. The kind of deal you make when you want a building to become somebody else's problem fast. Somebody spooked him, Elena said, and we both knew who. Title pulls leave footprints. My $11 trip to the recorder's office months back had probably crossed a screen somewhere, and Ray, who had spent 26 years listening for exactly that sound, had heard it. Then she explained what a closing would actually mean, and the room got colder. The developer's acting in good faith. He has no idea the seller's authority rests on a forged affidavit. If that sale records before we file anything, he becomes what the law calls a bona fide purchaser. Unwinding it could take years, and you might never get the building back at all. You'd be chasing Ray for money he'll swear he doesn't have. The theft gets laundered through an innocent man's checkbook. She tapped the calendar. We don't have months anymore, Marcus. We have a filing race. The patient plan died that afternoon. Elena drafted like the building was on fire, a quiet title action, an emergency motion, a lease pendens ready to record, the legal equivalent of nailing a sign to the courthouse door that says this property is disputed, buy it at your own peril. But to survive Ray's lawyers, the forgery claim needed more than my word that the signature wasn't mine. It needed a forensic document examiner. And the examiner needed comparison samples from everyone whose name appeared on that affidavit, which brought me, finally, to the thread I'd refused to pull since the first night, the second witness on the notary block. Diane Voss Hale. My mother. I'd been carrying that name for months, folded up small, telling myself there had to be an explanation, and never once going to get it. Because there were only two possibilities, and I could live with neither. Either my mother, who left when I was 7 and surfaced maybe once a decade with a birthday card that arrived in the wrong month, had come back exactly once, to help Ray bury me. Or the woman had been dragged into this some other way I couldn't picture. She lived 4 hours south, in a faded green rental with wind chimes on the porch. I hadn't seen her in 9 years. When she opened the door and saw my face, she said my name like a question she was afraid to finish. I didn't sit down. I put the affidavit on her kitchen table, turned to the notary block, and set my finger under her signature. I need you to tell me about this. And I need you to tell me the truth, because for once in my life, I'll actually know if you don't. She read it. I watched her lips move over the words voluntarily disclaimed. I watched her reach the date, 8 months after Ruth's funeral, and go pale in a way nobody can fake. Marcus, I have never seen this paper in my life. That's your signature. That is not my signature. Her voice cracked upward. Look at it. Look at the D. I've never made a D like that. I loop it. I've looped it since grade school. Look, she grabbed a pen and an envelope from the counter and wrote her name, and her hand was shaking so hard the first attempt came out ragged. Then she wrote it again. And again. And she was right. The loop was there every time, and it wasn't on the affidavit, and neither was the flat little collapse at the end of hail that her real hand couldn't stop making. Then she told me where she'd been that fall, and it was checkable. A kitchen job in Arizona, on the books, taxes filed, an apartment lease with her name on it 1,100 miles from where a notary supposedly watched her sign. The examiner would later confirm all of it, the payroll records, the lease, and the handwriting. Both signatures on that affidavit, mine and hers, had come from the same pen. Ray hadn't found two witnesses. He'd manufactured them. My mother sat down at her kitchen table and cried, and it wasn't for herself. He used me to steal from you. I gave him that. I left, and I made myself into somebody whose name could be borrowed, because who was ever going to call me to check? She looked up. I don't get to be angry the way you do. But I get to be angry. I stayed 2 hours. We didn't fix 26 years at that table, and I'm not going to pretend we did. Her sin was real, but it was absence. Not theft, and there's a difference, and I'd spent months preparing to hate her for the wrong crime. Before I left, she wrote her name 20 times on a clean sheet for the examiner, slow and steady now, and handed it to me like it was the first useful thing she'd been allowed to give me since I was a kid. Maybe it was. I drove home with the samples on the passenger seat, doing the math on our deadline. 12 days left. Elena needed 4 more to finish the filings bulletproof. It was tight, but it was workable, and for the first time since the title office, I let myself believe we were ahead of him. Then, at 11 at night, the burner phone Elena made me carry lit up. Only one person had that number. And I'd given it to him weeks ago as the sub-named Voss, in case of building emergencies, Cody. I answered, and his voice was low and strange, like a man standing somewhere he didn't want to be overheard. My dad just showed up with his truck and a shredder. He's in the basement office pulling files. He told me to go home. A pause. I could hear him deciding something inside. I didn't go home. And I think you knew this was coming, man. So before I do anything else, I need you to answer me straight. Who are you, really? I told him the truth on the phone, or the start of it. My name isn't Voss. It's Marcus Hale. Ruth was my grandmother. Meet me at the bakery door in 20 minutes. And I'll show you everything. After that, whatever you do is your call. He was waiting when I got there, arms crossed, jaw tight, a man who'd clearly spent the drive over deciding not to trust me. Upstairs, faintly, we could hear it, the whine of a shredder running in the basement, his father feeding 26 years into the teeth of it a page at a time. We went into the old bakery space and I laid it all out on Ruth's original workbench under a drop light. The land trust with my name on it. The affidavit. The forged signatures, mine and my mother's, with the examiner's preliminary letter beside them. The rent rolls Elena had rebuilt. And in the middle of it, the green water-stained ledger I'd pulled out of the wall he'd watched me open. Cody read for a long time without speaking. He was slower with the affidavit than anything else. He read it twice, and I watched a decade of small unexplained things reorganize themselves behind his eyes. Finally he said, I always figured the family arrangement was ugly somehow. I figured maybe he was skimming, cutting corners, whatever. I patched it. I've spent 10 years telling tenants their money went to repairs I knew never happened. He looked up. I never once thought he built the whole thing on a forgery. That's not cutting corners, man. That's a crime with my grandmother's name on it. Then he pulled the recipe ledger toward him. Careful, the way you handle something that belonged to a person you loved. Cody had known Ruth too. She died when he was 7, but he remembered the bakery, remembered her sliding day-old rolls across the counter to him. He turned the flour-dusted pages until a margin note stopped him, small square print beside a sourdough schedule. The building is for M, but the recipes are for whoever still gets up at 4. He sat with that a while. She knew, he said quietly. She knew exactly who everybody was. She knew who'd show up and who'd circle. He closed the book. My dad's downstairs shredding proof of who he is. And he told me to go home so I wouldn't see it. I want to be honest about what I said next, because it's the part I'm least proud of and most sure was right. I told him he owed me nothing. That I'd lied to his face for months, worked beside him under a fake name, and used his building keys and his trust to build a case against his father. That whatever he chose, I wouldn't blame him for choosing blood. Don't do that, he said. Don't make it noble to walk away. You know what I've actually been doing for 10 years? Covering every excuse to a tenant, every invoice I didn't question. If I go home tonight, that's not loyalty. That's just inheriting it. He picked up his key ring. The old handwritten books aren't in the basement office. He moved them to the storage cage on 2 last spring, and he's forgotten, because I'm the one who carried the boxes. We called Elena at midnight. She was awake, because of course she was, and her instructions were surgical. Cody had lawful access, keys, and standing authority over building storage. I did not, so I would touch nothing. Cody would remove the records to a secure location for safekeeping and inventory every item, and Elena would seek a preservation order at the courthouse door in the morning so that everything surviving was frozen under a judge's signature before Ray's shredder saw another sunrise. And one more thing, and she was immovable about it. Not $1, not one promise, not one hint of a job or a favor could pass from me to Cody. The second his declaration looks purchased. She said, Ray's attorney turns him from a witness into a co-conspirator flipping for a payday. He does this clean or he doesn't do it at all, so he did it clean. That night, while the shredder ran 2 floors down, Cody carried 11 years of his father's real bookkeeping out the freight entrance in milk crates, logged every ledger and folder in his own handwriting, and drove them to Elena's office himself. 3 days later he sat in her conference room and gave a sworn declaration, dates, amounts, the 3 tenants who paid cash, the maintenance invoices for phantom work, the standing instruction to keep certain payments out of the accountant's tidy book. He asked for nothing. When Elena confirmed, for the record, that no compensation of any kind had been offered or expected, Cody said, I'm not doing this to my father. I'm doing it for whoever I'd have to become if I didn't. Elena filed the quiet title action and had the lease pendens signed, sealed, and sitting in her briefcase like a round in a chamber, timed to record the morning of the closing and not 1 hour before. So Ray's lawyers would have no runway to maneuver. The cost landed on Cody fast. Ray noticed the storage cage was light within the week. I got the account secondhand, Cody's voice flat on the burner phone, his father showing up at his apartment, first wounded, then furious, demanding to know what he'd taken and who'd gotten to him. Somebody's poisoning you against your family, Ray kept saying. Everything I did for this family. Cody said the worst part wasn't the yelling. It was watching his father stand in his doorway, genuinely unable to imagine that his son had simply seen the truth and chosen it. I hung up carrying a guilt I still carry, because I'd handed a decent man a war with his own father. But guilt and doubt aren't the same thing, and I didn't have the second one. Then, with 8 days left on our clock, Elena called before 6 in the morning, and lawyers don't call at that hour with good news. The escrow office had confirmed a schedule change requested by the seller. Ray had moved the closing up 4 days. 72 hours, Elena didn't panic. I learned that about her in those 72 hours. Some people get faster when the water gets rough, and she was one of them. The complaint was finished at midnight the second day. The lease pendens was signed and ready the third. And on closing morning, she and I were standing outside the county recorder's office when the doors unlocked at 8. At 8:01 a.m., a clerk who had no idea she was ending a 26-year lie took Elena's paperwork, checked the legal description against the parcel number, and brought her stamp down with a heavy mechanical thunk I felt in my back teeth. Recorded. From that second, the Alder building's title carried a public flag. This property is claimed. This property is contested. Buy it and you buy a lawsuit. There was no such thing as an innocent purchase anymore. The closing was set for 10, at the escrow office 6 blocks away. Elena had arranged two things quietly in advance. A process server, waiting in the lobby with a copy of the lawsuit. And a courtesy call to the escrow officer, timed for 9:40, suggesting the title company run one final updated search before anyone signed anything. Title companies always run a last search. Elena just made sure nobody skipped it that particular morning. We sat in a coffee shop across the street, and I watched the front doors like I used to watch a tow line under strain. Ray arrived at 9:50 in a sport coat, moving like a man about to get paid. The developer came with two people and a leather folio. And at 10:10, right about when the pens should have been coming out, Elena's phone buzzed with a text from the escrow officer that said only, "Search came back." Meeting paused. "You should come over." The conference room, when we walked in, was the quietest loud room I've ever entered. The updated title search was on the screen at the end of the table, my lease pendants sitting on top of the chain like a stone on a track. The developer wasn't angry. He was done, which is worse. As we came in, he was sliding his cashier's check back into his folio, and he said to Ray, without heat, "Mr. Delgado, my attorneys will contact you about my deposit and my costs. We won't be speaking otherwise." Ray was saying it was a mistake, a clerical thing, a nuisance filing, he'd have it cleared in a week. Then the process server stepped through the door behind us, confirmed his name, and put the complaint in his hands. And then Ray looked past the server, and he saw me. I watched it happen in stages. First, simple recognition, the sub from Harbor Mechanical. Voss. The guy who fixed the boiler. His mouth actually started to form something about what is the handyman doing here. And then the stages collapsed, the beard, the eyes, 26 years, and I watched my uncle understand, in front of witnesses, that the man he'd almost recognized in his own basement had been in the building for months, and had been its owner the entire time. "Marcus," he said, and it came out with no air behind it. "Hello, Ray." I'd rehearsed harder sentences than that. I didn't need them. Elena had taught me something in those 7 months. In a room like this one, the most powerful voice doesn't belong to anybody standing in it. It belongs to a stamped county record and a sworn page. So I let the documents talk, and I watched Ray cycle through every version of himself trying to find one that survived. Denial first. The affidavit was real, I'd signed it, I was young and confused and had wanted nothing to do with a failing building. Then blame. His lawyer would deal with this. This was Elena's ambush, this was Cody. Somebody had turned his own son into a weapon. His attorney arrived at 11 and tried the only door left, telling Elena that whatever happened, it happened 26 years ago, and the statute of limitations had run out on all of it decades back. Elena didn't even open her briefcase. "Fraudulent concealment tolls the statute," she said. "The clock doesn't run while the fraud is actively hidden from the victim. Your client forged 2 signatures, misdirected an heir, and maintained the concealment through last month, when he tried to sell the property. Every year he spent hiding it is a year the law waited. He didn't outrun the statute, counselor. He kept it alive personally. The case took 5 more months, but it was over that morning, and everyone in the room knew it. The forensic examiner's report tied both forged signatures to one hand. Cody's declaration and the preserved ledgers mapped the cash. My mother's payroll records put her 1,100 miles from a notary block that swore she'd been present. The court quieted title in my name, imposed a constructive trust over 26 years of rents, and did the arithmetic without mercy. 1.9 million in net rents converted, plus prejudgment interest, a judgment just over $3.1 million. The forgery findings were referred to the district attorney, who declined to file charges on an offense that old. I understand why that disappoints people. But the referral itself is in the file, permanent and public, a government record stating plainly what Ray Delgado did. No one in our family gets to retell that story now. It's already been told, under oath, with exhibit numbers. The moment I actually carry from that day isn't legal at all. It's Ray at the end of it, standing in the doorway of the conference room, everything settled except his leaving. He turned back once. Not to apologize. Not even to argue. He looked at me like the question had been eating him longer than the money ever fed him, and what he said, half to himself, was 26 years. She had a lawyer. She had paperwork. She had time. His voice dropped. Why didn't she ever tell me it was you? I didn't have an answer for him that day, she did. It was waiting in the last place either of us would have thought to look. The judgment came down in early spring, title quieted in my name, 3.1 million owed, paid the way those things actually get paid, not in a dramatic check but in pieces, over years. Ray's condo went. The truck went. A retirement account got garnished a slice at a time. He'll be paying it down for the rest of his life, and I've made peace with the fact that I'll likely never see all of it. That was never the point. The point was a court file with his name on it that says, forever, in the driest language on earth, exactly what he did. He never once apologized. I want to be honest about that, because I know how these stories are supposed to end. At his deposition he called it a family arrangement to the last. At the final hearing he looked through me like I was a window. Some men would rather sink with the story than swim without it. But here's the thing I came to understand, Ray's sentence was never going to be handed down by a judge. His sentence is that his own son gave a sworn declaration against him, and everybody who shares our blood knows it. Cody didn't campaign against his father. He just stopped lying, and when aunts and cousins called asking what really happened, he told them to go read the file, it's public. One by one, they did. The story the family had told for 26 years, poor broke Ruth, and that grandson who ran off to the boats and never looked back, didn't collapse with a bang. It just quietly stopped being repeatable. Nobody tells a story at Thanksgiving that the county recorder can contradict. My mother and I have coffee now, every few weeks, at a diner halfway between our two towns. I won't dress it up as more than it is. There are silences. There are years we still can't touch. But she was wronged in this too, her name stolen and signed to a crime she never saw, and something about fighting that together gave us a place to stand that we'd never had. It isn't absolution. It's coffee. Some bridges you don't rebuild. You just keep meeting in the middle of what's left, and it turns out that can be enough, and the building. The upstairs tenants stayed, with honest leases and repairs that actually happen now. But the ground floor, the papered-over windows, the dark bakery where I found her ledger in the wall, that I kept for her, it took 8 months to bring it back. New ovens where the old ones stood, because the old ones were past saving, but the original workbench stayed, and so did the proofing room door I'd repaired under a fake name. We reopened it as Ruth's Kitchen. A working bakery, and 3 mornings a week, a free breakfast for anyone in the neighborhood who needs one. No questions, no forms. The first person I hired to run it was Cody. Not as a peace offering, he'd have thrown that back in my face, and he'd have been right to. He earned it the way everything in that building was ever earned, by showing up early and doing the work. He took baking classes at night for half a year before he'd even let himself touch the dough. His father hasn't spoken to him since the deposition. Ruth's margin note was right about who still gets up at 4, I didn't quit the water. That surprises people. I captain the tug 4 days a week, same as always, and I bake on the mornings I'm ashore. The deed to the Alder building isn't framed on any wall. It sits in a drawer in the office. In a folder where paperwork belongs. A building doesn't need a document on display to prove whose it is. It proves it every morning at 4, when the lights come on and the ovens start breathing. The ledger lives on a shelf by the bench now, and we bake from it. Her sourdough. Her molasses bread. And months after we opened, on a slow morning, I finally did the thing I'd somehow never done. I turned past the last recipe to the very back cover. There, in that small square print, dated 3 weeks before she died, was one final note. Not addressed to M, addressed, I think, to whoever needed it. Raymond will ask why I never told him. Tell him the truth, I watched both of them my whole life. One asked me what the building was worth. One asked me when the bread would be ready. You protect a thing by giving it to the person who loves it for the right reason. She knew. She'd answered Ray's question before he ever thought to ask it, and she'd left the answer in the wall of the room where she taught a 7-year-old to work. They told me she died with nothing. That there was nothing to come back for, nothing to inherit, nothing left of her at all. And I believed it for 26 years, standing watch on other people's cargo while my own sat waiting under a stranger's name. But it's 4 in the morning now, and the lights are on at 411 Alder Street. Cody's pulling the first trays. The coffee's going for whoever walks in cold. And I'm standing in the middle of everything she built, everything they swore was gone, and the whole place smells like bread.